being here, but we missed each other, sort of. I was
sadly
like it last year. So hello.
Well met, and good to see you, John.
Yeah, good to see you too, man.
So this should take like up to 1 hour, I guess.
I'm hearing someone die.
Can you repeat?
I'm definitely
Someone being
hearing
murdered.
someone being murdered.
It's not me, I swear.
All right, so we'll be kicking it off in a moment. Please remember there may be some slight delay. So remember about making some pauses as you speak, guys, just to allow for, the time difference and everything. We do have a couple of topics, but I won't be interrupting you much. I guess you'll have a good time talking to each other anyway.
Can't hear anything.
Play music.
Who's playing The Cure?
I mean, the logical assumption would be you, Darren.
Me?
Yep. I think the microphone icon also pointed your way. So
Me?
yep.
Was it me?
That's
Really?
absurd.
I don't think it was me. I thought it was Austin. Austin's thing lit up for me. That was weird.
I think this is like Among Us. We're being pitted against each other.
Who is the person blasting The Cure on the call?
All right, let's give a couple of more minutes for everyone to join also here in the room with me. So just stay tuned, guys.
Yep, no worries.
Will do.
I love it. It's like 5 surreal things.
What is that?
What is
Where's that
happening?
coming from? Is it not coming from here? It is not.
Me either.
What's going on?
Austin.
Are we on punked?
It looks like it's coming from Austin's microphone.
It's absolutely not. Look,
Yeah, it stopped when you turned that off.
Definitely.
It stopped. It's definitely your mic.
Someone hacked your microphone.
It's got to be playing on your speakers or something.
what that actually was coming from me somehow?
Yeah, it was coming from you. Yeah, because when you muted your mic, it stopped.
Well, what the fuck? I have absolutely no fucking clue what's going on. I feel like I should just burn the building down.
Right, I see a lot of people joining here in the room, and we're also live online. So 1 more minute and let's start. And Austin, no soundtrack this time.
I'm gonna do my damnedest to figure out what that was.
You can also try to bring the microphone closer to you. We're hearing you like from a distance, if that's
Yeah,
possible.
I hear about this. Is that a little bit?
Yeah. Nice.
Slide in a little closer.
All right, Ethan. Very well. I think we have a full room here, so welcome everybody. We'll be kicking off the panel discussion with Darren Korb, Austin Wintory, and John Everest. We're supposed to have also Borislav Slavov here, but it seems he's perhaps unable to join yet. If he attempts to join in the meantime, I will let him in, of course. Borislav is here with us in Wrocław, Poland. He's just getting ready to the Symphony of Sin concert. So I guess he's very, very busy right now. Anyways, I'm Christoph from the Gaming Music Foundation here in Poland. And it's the second day of the 3rd Gaming Music Festival. So we wanted to use this occasion to bring a couple of great events to everyone here, also streamed online for the first time. So thanks a lot to you guys, to you, Austin, John, and Darren for joining. I know it's rather early, most probably, in your time zones. I know it is for sure for Darren because he just had a masterclass workshop. Nevertheless, thanks a lot. Let's maybe start the discussion with the most cliche topic that came to my mind. So how has the pandemic affected your life as a composer? So do you guys enjoy the sort of solitary confinement that was imposed on most of us or on all of us, or not really? Well, walk me through. Darren, what do you think?
I generally prefer my solitary confinement to be self-imposed. So, um, you know, I used to work out of the Supergiant office 4 days a week, and I'd work from home on Fridays, starting in 2015. And it's really nice to be able to interact with my coworkers and fellow humans. And so obviously I've missed that for sure. The Zoom thing. You can only do so much of that in a day before you have like Zoom fatigue. But that being said, I've made it work, and I've brought gear home that I needed at my house, and I built a vocal booth and did what I had to do to kind of get stuff, just kind of keep moving and keep working, and all things considered, it could be worse. I could do a job that I can't do from home, and so on the one hand, yeah, it's a bummer that I can't see my coworkers, my friends, but on the other hand, I'm really I count myself lucky to be able to continue just sort of working uninterrupted through this horrible time.
Right. So John, was it the same for you? How long do you think you can keep it up like this?
I agree with Darren. Yeah, there's something about like it being imposed on us. I think we're naturally solitary, the way composers work, but just knowing that I have no other option, I think makes it a little more stressful. But yeah, I think also we're extremely lucky to not only be able to do the work from home, but also that video games in general are relatively unscathed at the moment. So yeah, I mean, I'm just feeling incredibly lucky overall.
Austin, how about you?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I really hate about it. I don't think it has brought out the best in people or the most charitable attitudes. And so it's one of those that the kind of the thought of it isn't sometimes worse than the reality of it. It's like the subtext of it is worse, because the reality is like these two fine gentlemen have just said, it's basically life more or less as it was. Darren's probably, I think, had the biggest shift from working in a studio. But basically the work continued. I have friends who work in TV, for example, whose life just instantly came to a halt because their show stopped shooting, and so that's that. We just wait it out, hope for the best. And yeah, games appears to be pandemic proof, but yeah, echoing John's sentiment of feeling lucky, definitely got very lucky on this end as well. Just that, like, Darren and I were in London recording right before all this happened, and the nature of our recording would not really have been possible to find a kind of pandemic version of, like you can do these sort of aggregate orchestras where everybody records individually at home and you stack it all up on top of each other, and you can definitely make a thing doing that, and it can be pretty cool. But if you're trying to record 40 strings or even an intimate chamber group like we did with Darren's, people playing off each other in the room, never mind that Darren and Ashley were singing live and stuff, like, we got lucky because the whole world shut down weeks later. And that was planned just by luck of the draw. Yeah, fortunately, had a couple projects in that boat that we just recorded. We were like Indiana Jones sliding under the door as it came down, and then I was able to delay I've had a few recording sessions since then, and I was able to push them to the last possible second in order to give the orchestras time to kind of build the confidence to say, okay, we can do we can do a recording like these orchestras in Europe where their situation is very different, and they're able to kind of space everybody out. We reduce the size of the orchestra. Everybody gets tested before and after the sessions, and been able to do, I've had 4 different orchestra sessions in the last 8 weeks or so, that were all a little weird, but doable. And if we'd had to do them, in May or something, it would have been screwed. And just by luck of the draw, none of my projects required recording like that back then. So could have been way worse. Could have been way more inconvenient or just overtly like destructive to the product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all, of course, with the caveat that like I'm very grateful that I'm not sick. I'm not dealing with the health aspect of it, which supersedes all of the inconvenience of recording, and nor the people I work with or any of my family members or anything like that, which should go without saying, but I am anyway.
All right. And looking at that from the hardware perspective, do you have everything you need at home, or were you used to, going to a studio that's, for example, closed right now?
Well, my answer is short, so I'll just jump in. I have my own space that's entirely my own. It's not at home, but it's mine. So I basically just continued life as normal, because getting in my car, driving here, I never would interact with anybody, would never see anybody. So, it's like working from home, even though it's not. So in that sense, yeah, again, my life, it's the lack of coming to travel to see folks like you that's been the biggest change. I normally am on planes all the time, and I haven't been on a plane since February, I think.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm relatively like self-contained. I'm in the process of a move right now, so it's kind of chaotic. But yeah, I have my own pretty large room that I work in at home. I think the biggest change is collaborating with live players, bringing them in to my room, which is often fun. But we can still do remote recordings pretty easily, soloist remote recordings pretty easily. But yeah, it's pretty we're well prepared to do a lot of the project work in this kind of contained bubble that we've already built up over the years.
Right. So it seems like, a part of risk management from a composer's perspective to be self-contained like you. Like, if something like that happens again in the future, you should be good to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of my plan. I saw this coming, several years ago.
Absolutely.
Composer prepper.
Pandemic response playbook you had ready to go.
You watched that Steven Soderbergh movie,
Contagion.
Contagion, yeah, and you were like, I got to be ready.
Yeah.
And Darren, you being an in-house composer, like permanently employed by Supergiant, so what are the major things that have changed from your point of view? Not being a contractor or a freelancer, but actually, 9 to 5 kind of job.
Yeah, it's just the shift to working from home all the time is really the big change from us. Everybody's dealing with some degree of upheaval from this, and I think a lot of Supergiants have kids and stuff, and so people are dealing with sort of homeschool, Zoom classes for their kids and stuff like that, and sort of trying to have everybody's work schedule and meetings. Meetings sort of work with all that stuff is a consideration, but I've got to say, I'm really sort of incredibly proud of how my team has handled this and just sort of shipped a game in spite of all the insanity, basically when we intended to, and all that stuff. So it's one of those things where we all just kind of brought home whatever gear we thought we might need, and then acquired stuff that we didn't have, and just kind of made it work. I mean, I was in the middle. This happened like right before probably the most intense recording of voiceover, like on the whole project that we needed to do. And we had a mix of actors who would record themselves remotely, and then some actors who would actually come into the studio, and I would record them in my booth. And all of those actors, we had to figure out, like, okay, we have like hundreds more lines for these people to record. How are we going to do it? So we'd just sent them all. I was like, let's just send them all USB mics, and I'll deal with the the consequences in post, and I'll fix it later. And so we managed to just to kind of just proceed in spite of all the insanity. So yeah, I mean it's yeah. I mean, as far as equipment goes, I mean, it's just, I have some outboard gear that I brought home for my studio, and I have, I brought home whatever instruments I thought I would need, and I got a vocal booth on the internet and built it in my house, and I'm due for a new computer pretty soon probably, but other than that, everything's fine in terms of gear.
I didn't realize you had all that VO coming in at the last minute like that, because the game's been in early access so long. I had the assumption, because I never played it until it properly shipped, even though apparently I bought it all the ways prior to that. And it didn't even dawn on me that you would have that gauntlet at the last second. That sounds delightful.
Yeah. In each of the last few milestones, I think we added about 3,000 lines of VO like each time.
Ooh.
Well, as someone who has played Hades about 20 hours in the last week, the results are, it's fine. You could have done better, frankly.
Well, thank you for the constructive criticism.
Yeah, I'll be forwarding my feedback through Jira.
Yeah, thank you.
So, well, Darren, I'm not sure if you mentioned this out loud, but you actually have a recording booth in the same room and 2 drum kits. So,
yeah.
John, Austin, are you guys like prepared for the same kind of apocalypse that Darren has just prepared himself, or do you prefer to stick with the piano and some VSTs and so on?
For me, I just have like some outboard gear and some synths and stuff. You can they're not really put together at the moment, but I've got like a little like modular setup and then some external synths. But for me, most of the time, I'm really just working in the computer and doing that, and then relying on soloists and stuff or live players to combine the two. But so yeah, no recording booth needed here at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you wish you had one?
No, I mean, I record, well, like John was saying, I pre-pandemic recorded musicians in here all the time. But they all, had to get, some of them already had home setups, and I just brought them in anyway because it was a better way to work. Others saw this as a kick in the ass and the need to get said, hey, there he is.
Yes,
the master of sin.
Lord of the Sin, correct. Yeah, so we managed to drag Borislav out of the rehearsals for the Symphony of Sin. So sorry, Austin, for interrupting you. We have Borislav.
I happily
right?
yield.
So say hello, Borislav.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Sorry for being late, but I'm very, very happy to see you guys. It's been a long time, my friend Austin. How are you?
I know, man. I think I don't even remember the last time we saw each other in person. It wasn't Ubida, was it?
No. It was in Cologne, actually.
Oh, of course. Well, that was only a few months later, though.
Yeah, too bad that you couldn't make it, guys. But I really hope that maybe I will be able to cross the ocean next time. Okay, so
yeah,
that would be nice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right now we're happy crossing the street.
So thanks, Borislav, for coming over here. Basically, we've been talking about how, one or the other. We've been talking about how the pandemic affected the life of a typical, quote unquote, gaming music composer. So can you say a few words how it was at Larian? Like, since the lockdowns and everything, what has changed for you personally and creatively?
Are you talking about Larian or me personally? Because
both, actually.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay, Larian, of course, like any other company, was affected, and I believe that you know what was the effect of the whole crazy situation. And when it comes to myself, it actually did nothing. I'm isolated by default, so I live in the mountain. I compose in the mountain, like 200 meters away from a really beautiful forest, and I can send you pictures. So basically, there was almost no difference for me, apart from the fact that I couldn't travel to stay connected with my colleagues. and game developers. But other than that, I really enjoy being isolated, like any other composer, I guess.
Right. That's actually my first question to guys. Do they enjoy being sort of isolated? Do they feel, let's say, free because they don't have to meet so many other human beings and so on? But jokes aside, do you have all the necessary equipment at home with you for, you know, recording, creating music and so forth?
Basically, 90% of my time, I compose, produce, and implement music in my professional home studio. So that was not a problem. But of course, one of the most important focuses when I meet with the directors of the company and when I stay connected with the game development cycle and production. But from one side there was a huge change because I couldn't travel to the headquarters of the company. But on the other side, I noticed that there was an increase of the focus somehow. If you know, I mean, when you're staying with the room, somebody drinking a coffee and get distracted once in a while. Personally, for me, I found myself way more focused when I had to listen to, net conversations in a way. I don't know, maybe just me or maybe someone else could also share similar experience. So what I'm saying here that there were downsides and also some certain positive effects.
All right, guys, do you want to add anything on the cliche pandemic topic?
No, let's get it positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get positive. All right, so let's move on. So we're in 2020, and it's kind of the end.
Great, wait, good way to.
I thought we were going positive.
Right. So it's the end of a decade, right? So if we look 10 years back, it was the year when the first Red Dead Redemption was released, or Mass Effect 2, and so on. So I'd like to hear some of your comments about how this decade has progressed from your point of view, in terms of whether you think we've come a long way from those games, for example, or has not that much changed actually in terms of, you know, both technology available to game audio specialists and let's say the relations with game developers and so forth. So John, maybe let's start with you. Had BattleTech been released 10 years ago, do you think you would have approached it differently or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I would have approached it differently. I think from my perspective, you know, a decade ago, it seems like 100 years ago in terms of, you know, every big game that comes out these days, and or even indie games and you know, games like Celeste or Hades as an example, the bar is just, it seems to be continuously getting higher and higher in terms of audio quality, audio complexity, audio interactivity. The music systems just continually kind of keep growing and getting more intricate, and the musicality of the implementation is just more and more seamless, which I think, you know, it's hard to even remember 10 years ago the experience of playing a game. Mass Effect 2 was one of my favorite games, but it's hard to remember what the music system was like in that. But I'm assuming it was relatively, you know, fade ins, fade outs, and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the music system part and the technology behind the middleware systems that people use now is just getting ridiculously cool and complex. People are kind of using Wise or Fmod as, you know, kind of like a DAW. It's a creative resource for composers to compose in different dimensions, right? Instead of just in one direction. So I think that just keeps getting better and more interesting.
Darren, would you agree? Basically, you know, Bastion was released 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, almost. Yeah, 2011. Yeah.
What do you think? Do you agree with John?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, just from my experiences that I've had with middleware in between, you know, between then and now, you know, on Bastion we used Exact, which doesn't exist anymore, but was a free Microsoft tool that basically would allow you to like put in music and press play, and like it wouldn't even loop cleanly, so you had to do some weird janky stuff to get it to even loop properly. So so the difference between that and then Fmod Studio, which I use now, where I'm like doing, you know, dynamic mixing with compression on all the different buses and like insane crazy busing and multi-channel music, where with, you know, tracks individually processed with like dynamic you know, dynamic low pass filters and stuff. I mean, just crazy cool stuff that I'm able to do in Fmod that is very much like stuff that you would do in a DAW. It gives you a real like a level of interactivity that I was, you know, certainly wasn't able to achieve with the tools that I had 10 years ago. And I had even if I had the ambition, there was just no way to, we didn't have a way to do it at the time. So certainly, like from my experience, that specific thing is really has really come a long way. And as far as, you know, where games are now compared to games then, you know, it's interesting. Like I've noticed the biggest delta, I'd say, in the sort of indie scene. That's sort of where my brain goes when asked that question. Is just like independent games in particular, like the sort of just the volume and variety of them is just insane now. The all the sort of, there's so much interesting stuff happening in the indie space these days, and tons of innovation, and like people just out of nowhere coming out with these awesome things. And certainly like the AAA space has like games are bigger and are rad still, but I notice maybe less of a difference. Like things were looking kind of photorealistic and great 10 years ago, and they're looking even more photorealistic and great now, but it's like less of a delta as far as from my perspective.
Yeah, I think the lines have blurred very much. So Borislav, do you agree with that actually? What's your view on how far we've come over the last decade?
Well, actually, I have a little bit different point of view. So for me personally, I'm speaking 10 years ago, actually, for me, was the very beginning of my development in the sphere of adaptive and interactive music. Not that previously I hadn't designed and implemented music, but basically 10 years ago was precisely the time when Crysis 2 was released. And for me, this was the first complete music system which I designed, composed the music for and implemented in the game. And for me, we had the technology back then almost, I mean, we had the same possibilities. Now, of course, they are deeper, better. We can make way more sophisticated music design systems, but even 10 years ago, I would say that we were able to do miracles and only the sky was the limit. I'm not going to present myself as a salesman of Wise, but even back then, Wise was a very powerful tool, and basically it was giving us, the video game composers, all the freedom in the world to go wild, and only our imagination was the limit. At least that was the way I felt about it. But there is a difference from my perspective, which makes me very happy actually, is that what I noticed in the course of the past 10 years is that the small indie studios and the independent composers which compose and produce music for the small indie studios started significantly increased the quality of the music in every possible way. When it comes to music, when it comes to production values, when it comes to music implementation, basically everything. And it makes me very, very happy because beforehand, only the big AAA company could afford to take the time and to spend the budget to design music system, to hire, you know, live musicians, orchestras and stuff like this. And it was sort of something that was, you know, I don't know how to put it in English, but you know what I'm saying. It not everybody could have the access to design, to implement, and to compose the really high quality and high production values music. Now, 10 years later, when I look around, I'm like, wow, wow, wow. And I mean, it's really unbelievable. And the guys, the young and uprising composers keep surprising me every single day. And this makes me very, you know, on the alert personally, and makes me happy, but at the same time wary, because wow, yeah. I mean, it's really cool. So I need to push further,
lazy,
and I cannot just stay and rely that whatever I did back then is going to keep my people happy. You know what I'm saying? So to summarize, to go back to your question, for me, the biggest difference was that the small independent game development companies and their composers now are fully competitive to the AAA guys, which is something very, very, very nice from my perspective.
Right. Austin, do you also feel young composers breathing down your neck?
Well, it's more like
Austin still classifies, or counts as a young composer, I believe, at least in comparison to.
I feel like I'm in the
You
nether
like
realm.
myself.
I don't. I'm in that middle spot where hypothetically I still have more time ahead of me than behind me. But it's such a young industry that you don't have to be very old to be an elder statesman. I totally agree with Bobby. Well, I agree. Every point made is a valid one. I think in particular, the fact that self-publication tools for developers have also gotten so simple. The sheer volume of games that comes out on a daily basis is so gargantuan now that it's also one of the biggest things is I find it a lot harder to even just keep up with what the hell is going on in the business. Like, because I always take a certain amount of pride in playing, ideally everything, and knowing kind of what is happening in the beating heart of the business. And like when I'll never forget this, when we shipped the first Banner Saga game, which was 2014. So we're almost halfway through the decade that we're talking about when that game even shipped. And when it came out, it was like, I want to say like May or something of 2014. And they told me that 71 or something like that titles were released on Steam that month. 2016, 2 years later, we shipped the Banner Saga 2, and it was around that same time of year, and it was like 450 games came out that month on Steam. And then 2018 was the Banner Saga 3, and I don't even know if numbers go that high anymore. And like it's been and never mind the mobile space where it's like the App Store records like it's like 10,000 games published a day or something, and they're almost all like 10-cent games, but it's like just a flood of content at all times. So on the one hand, there are exponentially more opportunities for composers than ever before. I mean, it's just the need. People out there making stuff that could use music is at a pace beyond anything in probably all human history, honestly. But even relative to 10 years ago, within the confines of the game industry. But the thing that to a specific point that Bobby made, actually also, and Darren, when you were talking about like AAA is kind of more AAA, but it's still basically kind of what that term would mean. I do think that there is some broadening as well. And one thing that I like is that every now and again, like the AAA basically musically always meant big orchestra. It always meant, like grand epic to the extreme. And that's still probably more true than not. But fortunately, because of things like The Last of Us, I think that there has been a broadening of what that can mean. And then meanwhile, in the indie space, the thing that excites me the most, that is a big change over the last decade, is that the very definition of what a game is has widened a lot. It's not just that there are more games, but people are making such different types of experiences where it's like, I've never thought to interact with software in this way before. I've never gotten these emotions in this way, I mean, because 10 years ago, no one was dreaming of, I think of like Fulbright, making games like Tacoma and Gone Home. And that was pretty off of everyone's radar of what a game could be. Or like the Chinese Room making games like Dear Esther and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And so that to me is, that's the most exciting development, is because I feel like another 10 years of that, especially, as the technology evolves and things become less about hardware and more about streaming, or we'll see if VR and even augmented reality, if those can really get a foothold to the degree that I know people are hoping, like things are really changing in terms of even what the definition of a game is. And I think that's just awesome.
Right, right. So do you think we've hit any specific milestones over the last decade, or not really? Was it more of a quantitative, step-by-step change, like Borislav mentioned, for example? Or is there any specific thing that you think appeared and changed the game so much that we should actually, remember about it in the future?
In, if you don't mind, I have a thought about that. I really think the ability within that span of time, there were a bunch of ways. Austin mentioned this earlier for independent game developers to self-publish games, and that is new in the last 10 years. It didn't exist before. So I think that is one of the biggest changes, honestly, is that people can have a lot of different avenues on major platforms to self-publish. And I think, honestly, that's sort of like a watershed thing that happened that vastly increased the volume of games, vastly increased the types of things that can be games, just because the gatekeepers have been removed, essentially. And people can just kind of make whatever they want and release it, and people can, stuff like Five Nights at Freddy's, just like a dude who like went and made this thing, and it was like this massive giant hit. It was like 1 million Five Nights at Freddy's games, so all that kind of story was a thing that didn't really exist. I mean, you had the like Braid, or happened like right before that, but that was Microsoft, I think, published that, and it was on XBLA and stuff. But the example of just like Phasmophobia, the game that's at the top of the Steam charts right now, one person made this game, and it's like everyone is. Oh, and the other thing I think, kind of in conjunction with that, is the rise of streamers playing games and people watching streams. I think that's totally changed the type of thing that makes for a hit nowadays. Like games that are streamable, I think have a lot more legs nowadays than that wasn't a consideration before. Having something that is fun for people to watch someone else play actually is a factor now, and can be a factor in a game success nowadays, which I think is another brand new thing.
I read, I can't remember where I read this, so I hesitate to offer it up as some kind of authoritative fact, but every year games reach, like the number of people that are exposed to games, is still nowhere near like human saturation the way movies and TV are. But that number is obviously kind of perpetually expanding. And I read that ironically, that more than 50% now of the people that sort of like are into games don't actually play games. They're watching YouTubers and Twitch streams and things like that. That actually more people than ever are kind of coming into contact with games, but that the majority of that growth is actually owed to passive viewers, which is that's one of those things that like instantly makes me an old man, I think, because I'm like, what the hell? But I also like how amazing though that some people, they love that, like they're like like a streamer like Jacksepticeye can play a game and just with some friends, and millions of people will watch who might otherwise never have any exposure to that game or anything, and then they get something good out of it. Like if the goal is to reach people, and we are reaching people, that's still a net positive, even if it's a nuanced, slightly peculiar one. But yeah, I think that's I don't really remember a watershed moment though of like, oh wow, Twitch or whatever streaming is now a thing. It feels like it kind of snuck in and just sort of gradually made its rise.
Right. Thanks for mentioning that. And I'd like to bring one more thing to your attention. Have you guys
lost the audio?
I think we lost everything after "have you guys," and then it cut out.
All right. Do you hear me now? Is it all right?
Yeah, we got you.
Very well. So I was just saying, have you thought about the rise of crowd-funded games like on Kickstarter and so on? And John, do you have any comments on that? Like do you think this way of making games, of funding them, is beneficial for a composer, because you can potentially get a higher budget, you know, if you hit all the stretch marks and so on, or do you think it's risky because of the nature of the process itself?
Yeah, I mean, for me, from personal experience, I mean, I really wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for Kickstarter, because that's kind of was my first entree into video games was with Shadowrun, which was a Kickstarter funded game from Harebrained Schemes that kind of set them on the trajectory to where they are today. And BattleTech was also partially Kickstarted too. And I think that that occupied kind of a space and time with Kickstarter that maybe I could be speaking out of ignorance, because I haven't really been following Kickstarter games much anymore, but it seemed like it happened kind of right at the right time for crowdfunding a video game of that size. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I know that after they did BattleTech, they kind of swore to themselves like, there's just a lot on the line. I think when you kickstart, you have a lot of deliveries to get to customers and people that can end up kind of weighing the process down to a certain extent. And you know, if it can get you off the ground to get that initial budget to actually make a game, that's great, but I think it can also kind of be a double-edged sword and can end up hurting developers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I imagine. So do you think we'll have, let's say, more projects like that in the future? Do you think it's a solid trend already?
I really don't know. After BattleTech, I've kind of I haven't really checked on crowdfunding, crowdsourced games really. I'm not even sure. I can't think of one recently that I've played that's been crowdfunded. Anyone else? Am I alone on that?
No, I mean it definitely had like this giant, because of Double Fine mostly. It had this explosion out of the gate in 2012, and then there was this maybe year and a half window where none of the games had finished yet. So there was like this isolated hurricane's eye of excitement where seemingly everybody who threw a game on Kickstarter just got piles of money thrown at them. And like John, I was very grateful, because the first Banner Saga game was one of those where they raised like 700% of what they asked for. And this was 3 random, you know, I say with love to these guys I've shared the last decade with and love dearly, but they were basically 3 nobodies from BioWare quitting their kind of mid-tier jobs to make a game that they wanted to make. And they were able to raise, you know, a boatload of money relative to their, you know, they had no reputation, no one heard of them, but their idea was compelling. God knows their art direction was astounding, and so they were able to get this thing off the ground and build, you know, a serious studio out of it. I think they're pushing 50 people now in house. I mean, they've really built a pretty serious studio out of what began as a crowdfunding campaign. But I don't think that happens now. And on top of that, like John was saying about the Shadowrun folks, like it's so insanely. I never want to do it again. It's so exhausting. I did a Kickstarter 2 years ago for a concert sort of theater event thing, a science show that I was putting on, and I still owe people shit for that. And because it's an endless, you in your excitement, you promise things, the scope of which, even as outrageously careful as I was, it could have been worse, but it's still that it's just such an exhausting way to do business that it's, to me, I've started to see it as a last resort. Of course, that said, I'm working on a video game right now that's a musical that financed a year ago on Fig. So what do I know? But to me, it was a thing. It was like a fad, and then a lot of people realized, oh shit, most of these people can't really deliver on what they're promising, and so a lot of that skepticism, and now there's a lot of gamers out there that are like, I will never give money to a Kickstarter, or I'll give a fraction of what I might have, because, you know, it's people don't deliver. I mean, or the games either come up short quality wise, or they just literally never come out.
Yeah, I think those are very valid observations, Austin. And I think that John's answer that, John, you said you're not following Kickstarted games that much lately. I think it's also a good indication of a certain fact that if someone wasn't following crowdfunded games like a couple of years ago, they still would have heard about the top hits from Kickstarter, because they were all over the place, basically. So you know, someone completely unrelated to crowdfunding always heard about those few the biggest titles out there. And
I think like with BattleTech as an example, that was kind of it happened at the right time, and also it's an IP that people already know about, and so it has that sort of like the potential to go viral or whatever, right? So I think much more sensible for BattleTech at that time in that space to be able to get some extra funding, and it wasn't entirely funded by Kickstarter, but Kickstarter. But yeah, I just it's hard to imagine that happening these days unless I think it's a larger IP, but smaller games for sure.
Okay, well, in case in point, the most recent game that I personally backed, I mean, occasionally, whenever a friend of mine makes something, I'll usually back it, just even then I'll immediately turn off notifications. The Gearbox did a crowdfunding of Homeworld 3. And I thought that was peculiar, but I also just love that franchise so much that I was like, ah, to hell with it, I'll give them money. So I get the updates, and I actually read them. And that strikes me as kind of like a BattleTech scenario, because it's a known IP that's got some, you know, it's got some legs going back 20 years or so. Yeah. But yeah, and they seem to be on track, and they raised a fair amount of money, but yeah, I think that peaked and is where it saw a market correction.
And like Austin said, I still talk, you know, I'm working with Harebrained Schemes all the time, and they've grown substantially. When I first worked on Shadowrun, I think there was like 10 people, and now they're going to be almost 100 people, which is ridiculous. Oh, and Mitch Gittleman, who's the studio head, still talks about, you know, owing people around the world pins and, you know, lapels and stuff, and these you know, kind of tchotchkes that were involved in the Kickstarter that ended up, you know, almost delaying development schedules and stuff, so they could fit, you know, get these things shipped out and to people. So I think it was just a big burden in general.
Okay, so when we're talking about crowdfunding, I have a little bit different point of view. Not that I disagree with you guys, on the contrary, I'm totally there with you. And the thing is that for me personally, from my perspective, crowdfunding is a great tool, but it's often used in a wrong way. Let me explain you why. It's like using hammer to paint your house. It doesn't work. Let me, yeah, this is a really strong example, but I'm going to dive deeper. A lot of developers try to completely fund their games entirely through crowdfunding. And for me, this is the wrong approach to use this otherwise great tool. The right approach, and for me, the main reason why I do consider the crowdfunding a really great and one of the best actually things of the last decade, is that it gave the independent developers the possibility to completely skip the publisher and to remain being independent, to keep the control, the creative control in their own hands. So basically, that's why I do believe that this is really the right question. What exactly is crowdfunding? Crowdfunding is a great tool which could be used in a totally wrong way, and which could result in a damaging reputation, giving it a bad name, but we can give a counter example. For example, you know what I'm talking about, or maybe what I'll give. You know, Battletech and is one example. Another example is Divinity Original Sin series. Divinity Original Sin, both two games, Divinity Original Sin 1 and Divinity Original Sin 2 actually was crowdfunded, but not entirely. That's the small but very significant difference. The company, Larian Studios, didn't expect it to entirely, you know, cover all the expenses. Say, voila, we have it, let's make it. No, we are pretty aware of the fact that this is not how it works. But we needed an extra leverage. We needed an extra, you know, financing to skip the publishing part, or in other words, to keep the control, the creative freedom in our own hands, and at the end of the day, to manage to self-publish our game. As a result, the game became Metacritic #1 in the entire world for 2 years in a row, for PC and a Switch. I don't want to sound, you know, but still, it's a...
Entirely because of the music.
I love you, you know that. So going back to what I wanted to say to summarize is that for me, thank you for the right question. I completely forgot about this one. Crowdfunding and early access actually are the two greatest tools of the past decades, personally for me. The first one, help the developers to keep the creative freedom in their own hands and to skip, you know, a complicated publishing relationship. And the second one, the early access gave the developers the opportunity to stay connected with their audience and to shape their games according to their audience, to their fan base, to make their fans happy. So going back and summarizing, great tool which should be used in a proper way.
So thank you, Versta, for those comments. I think they're really on point, and this sounds like the right moment to basically ask Darren to say a few words about early access done right.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't have a lot of comments about crowdfunding that haven't already been echoed. I think I'm the only person here who hasn't worked on a crowdfunded project. But yeah, I certainly have some experience with early access in the last couple of years. You know, we've been running Hades in early access, and it's a real different beast from developing sort of secretly for 3 years and then being like, here, you know, this is it. So it really, in a game like Hades that is designed to be super replayable and have people play it for a long time, and really we're trying to squeeze out every ounce of satisfaction we can get from the gameplay. I think exposing players to that and having feedback, allowing it to guide your tuning and sort of what you prioritize in development has actually been super, super helpful for us. And Hades absolutely could not have been made the way it was made. I mean, could not have been made to what it ended up being without early access. I mean, it wouldn't have worked. I don't think. And because a lot of your initial, you know, you kind of can dip a toe and see like, well, let's see what people think about that. You kind of shove something out the door and you know, people will respond in a particular way, and it can either give you the confidence to really lean into something, or it can help you understand how to sort of redirect and shape that into something that's going to be more interesting for people. So and not to mention, you know, the sort of the fact that it does help you sort of fund the continued development of the game too, because people are buying the game, and people are talking about the game, and so you have this sort of loyal player base that exists and can evangelize the game when it does come out in 1.0 if they're enthusiastic about it. So yeah, I mean, it's been really incredible working on a game in early access. I will say though that it changes the pace of development indeed, because you know, we shipped in 1.0 recently, and it was, you know, we kind of joked on team that's like, yeah, we've shipped this game 12 times already. You know, it's like it still is a big deal because it's 1.0 and it's done, you know, after that. But it's like not quite as intense at the end maybe as it would have been if you didn't have a bunch of instances of shipping something. But because we were constantly shipping, the it was definitely more of a marathon, I would say, than working on some of the other projects where you're constantly jogging, and maybe every once in a while you do a little sprint, but instead of there being like a massive sprint at the end of a project.
You mind if I ask a follow up and hijack for a moment, because I'm curious, Darren, to get your expanded perspective on that, since for me, the crowdfunded games are the only ones that I've played that had any form of early access, and particularly I remember this on the Banner Saga, where they had 20,000 backers and they were all given alpha, beta, friends and family builds. They were invited into the process at multiple points, not quite to the degree of like, okay, go on Steam a year before the game ships, or Epic before that even. But still, the bottom line is that there were people playing the game for well over a year and a half prior to our official launch. And the game was full of mock-ups of my score, because it being in a quasi-orchestral score, we were going to only record and we were done. And it was horrible. I hated that. I hated that with a passion, because and there were people that were excited about the game and would do capture and put it on YouTube. And it's like these because I didn't bother making good mock-ups because I knew we were going to record it. And I never thought there would be this chance of it like going into the world. And then on top of that, you record it, and like the mix is obviously, in my mind, exponentially better and all that. But there's people that have played like 100 hours who are like, oh, I liked it better before. And I'm like, what the fuck? And we would never have that problem. Yeah. So it's like, now, obviously, with what you're doing, and particularly with Hades, you don't have that consideration to quite the same degree. But I don't know. To me, did you was there any consideration of that? Because for me, that's a big, giant problem with early access that gives me nightmares.
Well, yeah. So the way I certainly considered that, and I listened to Gareth Coker tell horror stories about the temp score, the mock-up he did for Ark, and then he replaced it, and people were super pissed. And I mean, I certainly was aware of that developing, in the sort of almost year of development we did before we opened up early access. And my approach was that anything I put into the game was done. Everything I put into the game is finished from my perspective. And so I would have, and actually, as I added pieces to the game, I would have them mastered, and like we'd release a single and everything, like just because I didn't want to do that, because once I knew, I was pretty acutely aware of like, once it's out there, people are gonna want that version of it to be a version of it that is available to them still, regardless of whatever I think is the finished one. So I tried my my very best to avoid like a Star Wars special edition situation where I could go back and like, muck up some beloved thing. I
mean, in fairness, your music is made better by Imperial Walkers and Dewbacks being just added to the foreground of the shot.
I mean, yeah, that's neither here nor. I try to put those in the original version of the music, but no, I was certainly acutely aware of that, and I really tried to, whenever something was going to ship, I made sure that I was satisfied with it as a finished piece of music that did not need additional work from my perspective.
Right. Yeah. That sounds pretty interesting. So let's maybe compare that view with yours, Borislav, on early access for Baldur's Gate 3.
Well, yeah, I'm smiling because basically I share both point of views. First, I totally agree with Austin. It was a nightmare, because the moment I realized that if I put unfinished music in the early access of Baldur's Gate 3, somebody is going to chop my head off sooner or later. And this, as you can imagine, put an extra stress and extra, my life became real complicated from this point on. And a fun fact would be that 2 weeks prior to the release, I had to go and to conduct orchestral session, because I realized that if I put the mock-up, it's going to sound really awkward. And especially in comparison to the stuff that was already recorded with live orchestra and fully produced. This is a real challenge, and I totally agree with Austin. And I don't know. I believe that I did the right thing. I did what Darren is telling but I was lucky and happy that I realized I will go into a serious trouble if I put something that's not finished, that's not considered like final. Of course, there is some, work in progress there, but the main body of the work, I did my best. I killed quite a few good years of my life, but I made it final before the release.
But here's where, like, for example, in a few weeks, this game I've been working on called The Pathless comes out, and that's one where some of the most recent music I wrote for that game is me rewriting stuff from the very beginning of the game, because you just learn a lot. You spend 3.5 years on a project. By the time you get to the end, the palette, the aesthetic, the little nuances, you've learned of what that score should sound like. And the drafts from the very beginning feel almost like they're from a different project. I mean, they're from like a different chapter of life. And so to me, that the early access thing is like, if someone's playing if this were structured like Hades, where we're kind of giving people sequentially sort of deeper access into how far into the game you can go, it would have meant that the stuff that I was rewriting at the end, they would have had the longest exposure to. And to me, it's just like, it would have radically changed my process in a way that I fear would not have improved it if I had basically had the attitude of like, okay, once this thing crosses over the line, I'm never touching it again. It would have just been like throwing grenades over my shoulder. I think, and maybe that's just because I have a very iterative, like I just always assume everything is terrible and I look for any excuse to rewrite it. But because, I mean, there's just innumerable examples actually that I can think of from the past.
It's a really good example. Actually, I do believe that we are just lucky, Austin. I mean, at the end of the day, it really depends on the type of the game development. So different games, different development cycles, and we just happen to be on the lucky side this time around. But maybe next time it's going to be your lucky day.
Yeah.
What we are trying to say is that there are, downsides, but also a good sides to try to produce the final music. And again, I totally agree with you that it totally depends on the type of the game and on the style of the game developer, because obviously Darren and I are in a situation where the game development happens simultaneously with the production of the music, which makes us very lucky.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys, for sharing those insights. And before we move on to the Q&A session, let me quickly drop the last topic for you. So we've talked a lot about the past and a bit about the current situation. So let me ask you about the future just a bit. So any specific hopes and expectations? Like, we kept hearing all those buzzwords like 3D audio, binaural audio, augmented reality, and stuff like that. So do you think it's gonna crystallize in the upcoming decade more than it has crystallized so far? Or do you think those are just like the end of a certain road and we'll just come up with new fancy buzzwords? So John, starting with you.
I mean, for me, I'm really excited to see where we go with this next generation of consoles, and then eventually into the realm of complete streaming video games is interesting to me. I think we already are at a point where at least for me in the style that I've been working on with the games that I'm doing, you don't really have a lot of technical restrictions anymore in terms of like how much music you can add. I guess it depends on what console you're shipping on entirely, but yeah, I mean, I just got my Oculus Quest, the new one, shipped in the mail today. I'm really excited to try that out. I think there's a lot of really interesting potential with binaural audio in the VR realm, and yeah, I mean, it's just hard to say. I mean, maybe the next decade will all be replaced by AI by then. I'm not really sure. I hope not.
Right, so you're not worrying about the computational power of consoles or the hard disk capacity anymore. Is there anything that you are worried about still? Is there like another quantum leap upcoming, you think, or you're not really waiting for anything specific?
Yeah, nothing really comes to mind. I mean, yeah, I think binaural audio with music is quite interesting to me. I'm not entirely sure what the application from games that I'm working on or that I have coming up would be. I think it's interesting to make binaural audio and interactive music play in some interesting ways. To make music a little more interactive in experiences in games. But a quantum leap in music is hard for me to even think about. I'm not really sure what that would be, what that would entail.
So you allow yourself to be surprised, be it pleasantly or negatively. All right,
go with the flow.
Yeah, all right, that's cool. Austin, how about you?
Yeah, I think largely the same. The one thing I have an eye towards in the future is because of the success of the business model of Netflix, and we see Microsoft doing the same thing with Game Pass. The emphasis so powerfully on games as services does have implications for the kinds of games that will be viable, potentially. And there's a lot of outliers that keep proving exception to that. Everybody was celebrating that Star Wars, what's it called? First Order, not First Order, Jedi. Why am I blanking on the
Fallen Order?
Fallen Order, yeah. That game, sold like gangbusters and was like a traditional single player narrative game, and presumably that is not going to die, but that at the same time, that model is increasingly tested, at least in terms of how big you could possibly make a game like that, by the advent of games as services, where a game like Hades would flourish, which manages to kind of do both. But then you also have lots of games that are really not narrative at all. And as someone who was always about that as a gamer, and the implications for that as music, where music as a storytelling device is not as much of a factor in games as service. I do see it as like, this may be changing the landscape of what our day-to-day job is. It also may not. I'm not doom and gloom about it. I also, part of me celebrates, I think Game Pass is insanely consumer friendly. Like it's an incredible thing on the gamer side. And I celebrate that in the end, but especially as a gamer, though I'm not a subscriber to Game Pass. But that's just due to the lack of Xbox. So yeah, that's something that now, with regards to the implications of that for music tech and what, totally unrelated. It's just about what the trends of the kinds of games that are getting made will be. And it's mostly an unknown. I don't pretend to. Most futurists get it just hilariously wrong. It's just the vast majority. We single out the one person whose random guess was right. The Ray Kurzweils who make some. But for every one of them, there's thousands who got it wrong who we forget about. So I tend not to try to make guesses. I guess I'm closer to John in that way of do my best to push the realms that I'm interested in, namely interactive audio. And see where the rest goes.
Understood. Thanks for sharing that. So moving on, Borislav, your hopes and fears for the future? Anything specific?
Personally.
Personal. Yeah. So hopes, I have personal hopes actually. Maybe now it would be the right time to say that I truly admire something very special about the music of Darren, John, and Austin. And I would really much hope to achieve what they already managed to achieve. So your music, guys, is far away from the epic noise, which I'm really fed up of. And what I really hope to achieve in the future, and not only personally for myself, but I really would like to see the music develop in this direction. I hope with your help to introduce a new tradition and put more focus on more minimalistic but meaningful compositions rather than the epic noise that is going around all over the place. And I'm very happy to say that the first steps in this direction are already quite evident, and I can only hope that I can follow. And when it comes to the technology, I don't expect anything in particular. I just stay curious. I'm very open to technology, and I try to use anything new. But it, again, is an ending line from my side. For me personally, the music is the most important thing. As long as we excite people one way or the other, we are on the right path.
Thank you. Those would have been good last words, but we're not done yet. So let me just give the floor over to Darren. So how do you top that, sir?
Gosh, that's a very lovely sentiment. I really appreciate that. Me personally, I'm a little bit of a late adopter. I'm sort of skeptical of new trendy technology. Like I'm in 2020 still making 2D video games, so I'm very resistant to that the newfangled 3D games everybody's been making these days. I remember, in like 1998 or whenever Super Mario through what was it, 64, Mario 64 came out. I was like, I don't know, this 3D thing, this is gonna go away. I'm a Mario World guy, and so I think that I've sort of carried that chip on my shoulder forever about new technology, and I feel like we're over here in a company making game, like we just want to keep making Super Nintendo games basically forever. And like with new, but like fancier Super Nintendo games, like extrapolated, like, the Super Nintendo games essentially is kind of what I feel like we're doing in a lot of ways. So my focus is like pretty head down on like how can I go deep on like making that as cool as possible. And I'm sort of the VR and the AR and all that stuff is just sort of up here, and I'm not really paying attention, as someone who gets motion sick when they put on a VR helmet and whatever, so I'm really
like
fascinated.
You get motion sick just from an N64.
Yeah. So I, as someone who is not a Luddite, but certainly like a little skeptical of the stuff, until it becomes like this is truly the thing that is next, until the sort of level of adoption becomes extremely high. I try not to pay too much attention to it, even though I know that's what everybody's looking at and like anticipating. As we're not even on to 3D games yet, so.
Right. All right. Yeah. Great. Thanks for the whole story, Darren. So, well, a big thank you to all of you guys for sharing those cool remarks along the way. And let's use the remainder of our time for a brief Q&A session. So basically, let me start with one of the questions that appeared live on the stream. I think it's a really nice one, so brace for it. So do you guys think that music streaming services like Spotify are helpful to share OSTs, or are they rather detrimental because they actually reduce the potential soundtrack revenue? Who wants to go first?
Well, I can go first. I think that a lot of the hatred aimed especially at Spotify is misplaced, because I mean, they're not a perfect company by any stretch, but most of the time that I see the most vociferous complaints about them, it's from sort of old school artists with old school record label deals where they're making like 9% of their album, and when you reduce the total amount of income and you're only getting some small share, of course it's going to be you've reduced it down by an order of magnitude, and so it's a very predictable thing that would happen. I think people have this this notion that reality should be the way they want it to be instead of the way reality is. And the bottom line is that the 90s was an artificial bubble that was created by extreme gatekeeping. The fact that you could only buy music on a $20 CD, even if you only wanted one track. And so the advent of, obviously first file sharing, but then iTunes and then Spotify, that to me was a market correction. So when people bitch and moan about it being a devaluing of music, I'm like, I don't know that that's actually true. I think that people they're being given far easier access, and they are paying for it, and they're paying what they're willing to pay. And we don't like that they don't want to pay as much as they used to when they had to, but we also have to simply accept the reality of that, because at the bottom line, it just is a fact of life. So, it's a work in progress. I don't consider it to be a perfect business model, but I also do think that it was an unrealistic and clearly non-sustainable model before that was predicated on something that is ultimately not consumer friendly. The idea of, look, James Horner sold 11 million copies of the soundtrack to Titanic, and no one wanted his score. Like that just wouldn't happen now. And in a way, good on him. He made tens of millions of dollars. But at the same time, like, the consumer had to pay for a thing they didn't want. I just can't support that. So yeah, I see it as a growth pain, work in progress. We're working out the kinks, but things like Bandcamp are powerful tools to empower creators, and I love it. And I think it's all moving a good direction, even if it's not fast.
Great.
And I welcome disagreement.
Yep. So yeah, exactly. You're welcome to disagree. We can stay on this topic for like 1 or 2 more minutes. So if any of you wants to comment, go ahead, guys.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, we're in an era right now where you release a game and within 30 seconds there's 200 rips of the soundtrack on YouTube, right? And so I think, like Austin said, you have to understand this isn't, like he said, this is not the 90s anymore. This is an era where if people want the music, they're going to get it somehow, and I'd rather have them pay 1/3% or whatever it is, 1/3% per play than just getting it for free online from a source that's makes it the sound quality is not as good. There's more quality control over getting stuff on streaming services, and it's also, as an artist, there's brand awareness with it too, where you can build a following of people and do your own releases on top of game soundtracks and other soundtracks and stuff. And it can end up being a pretty good source of revenue if you do it right. It's much better than nothing, I think.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that, yeah, of course, royalty rates could come up and whatever, all sorts of details that could change about what's happening right now. But I really see people having access to this music as a really, really good thing, especially if the music, in our case, we sort of look at the music like a sort of advertisement for the game to some degree, right? So it's like people having access to this music is just net positive. And after Bastion, we experienced the thing where somebody ripped the soundtrack and put it on YouTube. It had like millions of views. And so we were just like, okay, well, we just need to start doing that as soon as the game comes out. So we just put our own soundtracks on YouTube for free instantly, like day and date with the game now, just so that it drives people to our YouTube channel instead of some random person, and we get to like talk about our stuff, and we can use it to have people engage more with the game and with us as a company and stuff. So yeah, I see access to this stuff as a positive overall, especially because I just think the two kinds of people I think probably most affected by a shift to streaming are people who are like really successful before, like Metallica or whatever, and people who are just starting out, right? And it's like, you know, the people who were really successful before, maybe they're not going to sell quite as many records, and the people who are just starting out, you know, they have a means to get their music out there, which they did not have before, and they're probably not going to make a lot of money from it, but they can certainly like make fans that way, you know, and people who will buy their, who will then go maybe buy their merch, buy their t-shirt, buy their album, buy their, go to their concert when, you know, concerts happen again and stuff like that. So I you know, there's certainly pros and cons.
Mm-hmm. Borislav, any quick comments?
Yeah, I'm totally there with Darren, actually. I don't think that the problem or the issue is with the streaming services, but that's what I believe. And I'm totally there with Darren that we rather capitalize the way we can from the streaming services and make the game popular and the music itself. Because let's face it, guys, I mean, if you cannot, you know, monetize from the streaming services the way we want, we can at least be happy with the fact that the music is being reached and goes to a really wide audience, and millions are players are happy listening to our music. Personally, this makes me very happy, and I don't bitch on the streaming services, not because they are not there. They are imperfect. But what I'm thinking is that we should be happy with the fact that our music goes to a really wide audience, and at the same time try to find a way to monetize and to make it work like it did before. I don't have a solution ready, but at least I try to stay positive, as Darren is saying, and at least focus on the fact that the music, our music, work for our games. Basically, because our games is what makes and keeps us alive.
Right, understood. So thanks everyone for sharing your views on this topic. Quite an interesting one, I think. Let's maybe take a question from the room, from the people who are here with me. So I'll be honest with you, we don't have that much time because the Symphony of Sin starts in like 1 hour from now, and there's a bit of logistics thing going on anyway because of the sanitary regulations. So a show of hands, whoever wants to come over to the mic and ask a question to any of the guys specifically, or to all of them, if you will. Anyone? Well, I saw you first, sir. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to be real quick. So earlier we were talking about the early access and the benefits of it. So from gameplay perspective, the biggest benefit is you get the feedback. But in music, it doesn't work like that, right? Like in Austin's example, he was not really happy of having to release the mock before the real thing was ready and people getting attached to it. So are there any benefits of early access for musicians? And then if not, where do you guys are getting your feedback for the final releases?
May I start, since I'm here? I'm very happy with this question because I was discussing this question with some of my colleagues a couple of days ago. Personally, there is a benefit from my point of view because I'm trying actually something with early access of Baldur's Gate 3, specifically with the battle music. I tried a couple of different styles, battle music. I do believe that they all work and they totally reflect the different battle situations in the game. However, there are some nuances here and there, if you know what I'm talking about. And I'm very curious to see which nuances will get the most of the attention, if you know what I mean. And personally, I'm doing something like A/B testing, if you like. It's not official, of course. I'm just watching what is going on out there. But yes, my answer to your question is yes. And I do believe that it's even beneficial for us, even though, like Darren, I put only final stuff. I try my best to put only final stuff. It's still rock solid when it comes to being narrative driven by the game, driven by the game design. But the different nuances I'm putting in different tracks then give me a really nice overview picture of what would be really the best way to stay focused on.
Thank you. Any further comments on that question, guys? Anything quick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I like to echo some of that. I mean, I think, you know, even though I am trying to put finished pieces in, seeing what pieces people respond to the most, you know, is interesting for me and is information that I can use when making the next thing. You know, I can lean into a thing that people have responded particularly well to, or sort of shy away from a thing that people don't care about or whatever. So yeah, it gives me sort of a barometer.
Darren is more honest than me. Thank you, man.
Yeah. No, so it gives me a barometer so I can kind of measure the response basically as we go. And even though I'm happy with what's there and it still exists, it doesn't mean it can't influence the sort of direction that I would like to continue to go in.
All right. Thanks, Darren. So let's quickly take one more question before we wrap this up. I have one coming straight from the chat, so let me ask that on behalf of someone. And let me ask one of you guys to answer that, since we are running low on time. So temp tracks and temp music used before finalizing the score. What's your experience with that generally, given how maligned temp music is in modern Hollywood? Who wants to take that? Temp tracks.
Austin, you got this.
Well, I suspect that this is a similar feeling amongst all my illustrious colleagues here, that broadly speaking, it's not a thing that comes up as often as our counterparts in the movie world, partly because we are there earlier and we're able to be part of the process while it's a moving target, and we're able to be part of the moving target itself. And so while discussions of pieces of music will always come up, like, oh, I like this and I like this about it, it has such and such quality, it's rarely like that they go to the point of putting it in Wise and scripting it into the game and falling in love with it because of the way that it happens. And I'm working on a game literally now that I can't talk about where that was a thing. But at the same time, I say to them, I think we can take this in a slightly different direction, and then you prove it. You just do that different thing. And if it's better, or it resonates with this specifics of this game for which it was actually written, unlike the temp, then they go, yeah, that's cool. And if there's things about it, I dealt with this a lot on Erica, if there's things about it that they're like, well, this one thing though, we really liked the sparseness, say, you just try to absorb the lesson of what's actually meaningful about that piece. And so broadly speaking, it's not a curse on our lives the way people would make it out to be. I don't speak for my friends here, but if I had to put money on it, I suspect they would echo this sentiment, that we roll with it occasionally, but it's nothing like the way it's represented in the movie world.
Understood. All right. Thanks for answering that question, Austin. So
do I have time to add one little thing to that real quick? So I had, before I got into games, there was like a millisecond where I did some projects for like a commercial, and I did the little infomercial spot, and that is where all that temp stuff it lives. I mean, it's like they just have a song. My asks I only did a few gigs that way, and my asks like every single time were, so we have this temp music we can't afford. Can you rip off this Coldplay song? Can you rip off this Jupiter One song? Can you rip off this whatever? And basically, for me, it's annoying, but I saw it as a really interesting production exercise where I tried to write a new song with the exact same production aesthetic as the thing they liked. And that was my personal challenge to myself, was like, they're probably just responding to the like vibe of this piece, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the production is a huge part of that. So I just tried to like recreate the production of this Coldplay tune or whatever, which is like a really interesting exercise as a recording engineer and producer. So I just kind of saw it as an opportunity to sort of hone my production chops, basically, whenever that would happen.
All right. Thanks for that remark. And huge thanks to all of you guys for being here with us. We've been talking for like hour and a half straight. So thank you for spending the time to be here with us. It was really great to hear all those comments. Just a few organizational statements from me. So the Symphony of Sin begins in 1 hour from now. So wherever you are, it will be the equivalent of 8 p.m. here in Poland. It will be streamed online for free. So just go on to the Game Music Festival's profile on Twitch or on YouTube, and you'll be able to experience for the first time music from Baldur's Gate 3 by Borislav himself. And also Divinity Original Sin 2. Right.
Awesome.
Awesome. Right. So I hope you guys will be there as well after your morning coffee or the next one. Thank you once again for being here with us. Thanks everyone for great questions and great comments. And well, let's wrap this up. So big thanks once again, and we'll be seeing you around, guys. Take care out there and stay safe.
Enjoy.
Yeah,
You
thanks
guys.
for having us.
I miss you here.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding.
Wish we were there.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, hopefully next
Good luck.
time.
Good luck, Bobby. I can't wait.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
All right. Yeah. Neither can we, actually. So let's go there, folks. Take care. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
See you guys.
Państwa bezpieczeństwo, prosimy o pozostanie